please consider supporting me for just $1 a month on Patreon. Link is in the description down below. Hey, what's up? Welcome back to Death Note month. So for this month, I plan to do a bunch of unusual videos, as in things I had never really tried in terms of Death Note month content. The last 2 Death Note months were filled with a lot of very similar video types, so I figured I'd shake things up this year, and it starts with this video. So, I get a number of requests in terms of what I should make videos on, and among the requests for Black Butler theories and Tokyo Ghoul videos, there's one specific request I've seen appear pretty much since I started the channel, that being a theory on what would happen if L got the Death Note instead of Light. And so, as a way of giving people what they've asked for, I decided, hey, why not do a what-if theory just for fun? So then, I hope you'll join me as we discuss what feasibly could happen if our boy L had miraculously come across a Death Note. Let's get started, shall we? Now, on the surface, the answer would seem to be very simple, and thus wouldn't need an entire video. L wouldn't use the Death Note, he doesn't support that kind of stuff, and he hates Kira, so why would he ever stoop to his level? Case closed, am I right? Well, it's not as simple as that, and for a number of reasons. First is that in this theoretical scenario, Light never got the Death Note, L did. Thus, Kira never came to exist. So, not only is there no basis for L to hate Kira, as he never happened in this theoretical timeline, but L isn't forced to stick so hard with his ideals of justice. L was only so harshly following his ideals because Kira forced him to do so, to make sure he used less dirty tricks to seem like he had the moral high ground. We saw what happened to Light once his rival was gone. He went off the edge. Suddenly, only killing criminals turned into killing anyone that's in my way or people I can benefit from killing. So, just as Kira strayed from his ideals without a rival, so too would L likely be a little less harsh about following his form of justice. Another reason why it isn't as simple is due to the simple fact that different circumstances could easily change how he reacts to, and thus how he might approach the Death Note. So, as you can tell, there's a bit of variety in how we approach this. So then, how about we just start simple? What would happen if L found the Death Note randomly at a point where it wouldn't be that much use to him? Like, if it were just a normal day and he had no real important engagements at that moment. Now, the first question is, would he even take it seriously to begin with? I mean, it's a notebook that supposedly offs people. It'd be a little hard to believe just by reading the inner cover. Now, while it's possible that he just ignores the notebook and moves on, I'd say it's more likely that he tries to get to the bottom of it. As we see several times throughout the series, L is a very curious person, and is even willing to contemplate about some pretty unrealistic stuff. It's why he's willing to truly think about Light's note about Shinigami's loving apples, or heck, why he even took on the Kira case to begin with. I mean, any normal person would just assume that a bunch of people having heart attacks at different places at different times would just be a coincidence. So the fact that he even thinks it could be an individual in the first place means that he must be willing to accept the idea of something as out there as the Death Note actually being a possibility. So yes, I think he would believe it was feasible, and I'd even go as far to say that he'd likely test it out. He's proven willing to sacrifice people in already dangerous situations, such as Lindell Taylor, so he'd likely test it on someone in the same position, i.e. a criminal on death row. Once confirming it worked, however, things would likely take quite a bit of a shift. I don't think L has any idealistic goals like becoming a god or ridding the world of criminals via offing them. Likewise, it's made fairly clear that he doesn't want power either, so in those cases the note provides very little benefit. It's also likely that he'd see the notebook as a huge threat, and I mean it is. Light was already a big enough problem in his eyes, but at least Light stuck mostly to criminals. If the notebook were to get into the hands of someone who, say, wanted power, the notebook could prove even more dangerous. I think that, in this scenario at least, L would likely end up destroying the Death Note for good to make 100% sure that no one dangerous could ever get their hands on it. I mean, with no provided reason for L to use it, it's unlikely he'd want to keep it, and having it on hand could also prove pretty dangerous. So yes, in this case, I think he'd dispose of the Death Note fairly quickly. So, we now know what happens in that case, but is there a situation where L might use it? Well, for that, we should look at a different scenario. What if L found it while in the middle of a really, and I mean really, tough investigation? I mean, L's a detective, so he's likely dealing with any number of cases at a time, so let's say he's stuck at a point where he knows who he's looking for, but he has no way of tracking them down. Even worse, there may be a situation where others could get hurt if he doesn't act. In this case, I don't think it's too unlikely for him to use the Death Note then. L has already proven time and time again that he's willing to do some pretty messed up stuff to solve a problem. I mean, we saw him sacrifice a person just to find out Kira's location, and we saw L confine and torture Misa for weeks. He's no saint, and in this case, the Death Note doesn't really provide many downsides for him at least. He's clearly not scared of what happens after he dies, as in episode 25, he was fully willing to write a name in the Death Note just to try and disprove one of the rules. So I think in this case, if it were the easiest path to solve a dangerous crime with little bloodshed, I think he'd use it. As for if he would continue using it, well, that's up in the air. I mean, he might just get rid of it after, but I think it's also likely that he just holds on to it just in case he might need it a little down the line. He wouldn't use it often though, likely saving it only for worst case scenarios such as this. But what if it wasn't someone else that was in danger? What if it was L or Watari that was in danger instead? Maybe someone managed to track L down and was attempting to off him when the Death Note miraculously finds its way into his hands. Would he use it then? Well, frankly, yeah, I think he would use it, if only to deal with the perpetrator. He certainly doesn't want either himself or Watari to go, and in this kind of circumstance, emotions would be running pretty high. He'd likely do it just so he and Watari could be safe. Chances are, however, that this would be a one-time thing, as in, he'd probably get rid of the notebook afterwards. I mean, he's already safe, and considering that thing could still end up in dangerous hands, he'd probably just want to get rid of it and forget that it ever happened. There's not a reason to use it after he's saved, and so it's just kinda useless to him. And since he isn't in an ongoing dangerous investigation like the earlier circumstance, it's unlikely that he'd think he'd need to use the thing to begin with. And that's really the biggest aspect of this. L wouldn't normally have a need for the Death Note to begin with. He thinks fairly highly of his detective work, so unless given a circumstance where he either couldn't solve the problem or needed to act quick to save people, why would he use the Death Note then? He's fairly well off on his own considering he's the first, second, and third best detectives all at the same time. Likewise, it's not like he wants power or money or anything like that. He seems fairly happy with what he has now, and as far as money is concerned, well, he seems fairly well off, so the Death Note isn't really needed there either, honestly. He also doesn't need it to enact justice on criminals. He's perfectly satisfied with the way he's currently doing things, so it's unlikely that he'd need the Death Note at this point either, honestly. What it comes down to is the Death Note is virtually useless to a person like L in pretty much every circumstance. Are there cases where he would use the thing? Oh yeah, sure. If he was in danger or if there really wasn't any other way, L would likely use it just to get things over with. And heck, even after using it, he probably wouldn't be all that fazed, honestly. The issue is that even in these cases, he's not going to be using it much at all. Using it infrequently in a best case scenario, and at worst, straight up using it once and then leaving it. In any other case, it's really hard to see a case where L would actually want to use the Death Note. He doesn't need it to solve crimes, he doesn't need it for power, he doesn't need it for money, he doesn't need it for fame, and he certainly doesn't need it to enact justice on criminals. Frankly, the Death Note would be almost worthless to L, a mildly amusing object at best. Now sure, if others got a hold of the thing, it could possibly lead to disaster, but not L. He's really just not that kind of guy. So hey, real quick, for those of you wondering from the last video, the second channel Duo Stuff will be receiving a Death Note video next week in celebration of Death Note month. So, if you want to be one of the first to see it, why not head over to Duo Stuff and subscribe? And while you're there, why not check out my video on Death Note games, which is pretty good on its own and has an amazing ending. Or how about watching some videos from my Metroid Marathon? They're pretty good, and Super Metroid's video releases this Friday, so why not head over there? And hey, if you enjoyed this video, why not leave a like or maybe subscribe, and hey, check out some of my previous Death Note month content. It's pretty good. And anyways, I'll see you guys in the next video for a video on the Death Note musical. See you later.